Here we go. Today is Sunday, April 16th, 2017, and this is episode 188 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hello, Jerry. Good to see you. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm not as busy as you are.
Yeah, I'm in this mode now where I just kind of wake up and figure out where I need to, which state I need to be in. So it's
in all seriousness, your travel schedule is why companies have private jets.
I can understand. Absolutely.
Because of how much time, you waste with commercial aviation, relatively speaking.
I absolutely understand that point.
But yeah, so we're hinting at we've missed a couple of weeks here and there. We do apologize.
All my fault.
First. Yeah. Well, I think we'll have to work on some mobile recording possibilities, maybe.
Yeah, we are. I'm definitely investigating that. So we'll come up with something that gets us a little more consistent. Last week I woke up on Saturday and found out I needed to be in New Jersey on Sunday. So we usually record on Sunday, and that kind of shot that plan to hell. So
instead, you had to go to New Jersey, which is wow.
It was lovely.
I'm so sorry.
Actually, the place I was at and the weather was quite nice, so it wasn't too bad.
Yeah, we make fun of Jersey, but it's really not that bad.
So just a reminder before we get into the stories, our thoughts and opinions expressed on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers, unless, of course, you are willing to pay, a ridiculous amount of money. And then, of course, our opinions and your opinions can align.
We can be bought.
Yes.
But we're stupid expensive.
It's very expensive.
It's true. Not as expensive as your mom, but expensive.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Here we go.
So I don't even know why we're having a show. Not much happened in the last couple of weeks.
No. I mean, it's been a quiet week. It's been a really quiet week.
Just good. It's, we blue teamers need a break from time to time.
Yeah. I mean, basically nothing been going on. Which kind of dovetails into our first story, which comes from Ars Technica, and the title is "Mysterious Microsoft Patch Killed 0 Days Released by NSA Leaking Shadow Brokers."
Supposedly NSA leaking.
Supposedly NSA leaking. Supposedly right. Shadow brokers.
Right.
Supposedly Russians.
Although, agreed, but I've seen a lot of linguist experts say that it's likely a native speaker trying to inject what they think a poor English speaker sounds like from Russia.
Yeah, I've read that too.
So who knows, right? It's the attribution game all over again.
Everybody wants it to be some way, right? So anyway, I guess it's been a couple of months ago now, or maybe a month or so ago now, we talked about how Microsoft deferred the Patch Tuesday for February.
Right.
And
with no explanation.
No explanation, and basically the industry was kind of standing there with their mouth hung open, like they've never done this before. And
now, to be fair, they also moved to cumulative patching at the same time.
Well, that's also true, and the point here is that there is a lot of discussion, but no confirmation, that possibly the reason Microsoft delayed their patching was as a result of a disclosure that the shadow brokers made back in January. After the January Patch Tuesday, before the February one, that they had a couple. The shadow brokers had a couple of code name projects that they were going to be disclosing, and in fact, this past Friday they actually did disclose that, and there was quite a bit of hoopla, especially on Twitter, because a couple of the exploits appeared to be 0 day, and in fact were tested by fairly reputable security researchers and confirmed to be vulnerable. However, upon further investigation and
vulnerable against Windows operating systems.
Windows operating systems. That's right.
Yep.
Like currently supported versions of Windows.
And highly effective, like single click,
yes,
full remote code exploit. You own the box sort of exploits.
Like, yeah, MS 08067 type badness, right? It's that kind of badness. But however, what transpired, actually, by the time I woke up on Saturday, Microsoft had released a press release, or I guess it was a blog post, more of a blog post than a press release, basically saying that, in fact, those were not 0 days. They were patched in the March Patch Tuesday release.
Nearly a month before the Shadow Broker's release of the code.
Correct.
And to be fair, backing up just a tad, Shadow Brokers was trying to sell these exploits.
Yeah, for like $100 million, right?
Right. And ultimately said, screw it, we're going to release it for free because nobody's buying. So here you go.
Right. So there's a in this particular article, goes through a couple of different conspiracy theories, and it's probably one of them or some combination of them. But basically, the thinking is that the NSA may have realized that this was about these exploits were about to hit the street, and so they contacted Microsoft to give them the details, maybe either directly or through some third party, and gave Microsoft a chance to patch them, which they were in fact patched in March. And by the way, at the time, Microsoft, if you go back and look at the MS, it was MS 17010 is the patch number. If you go back and look at it, they have a table, and it shows that none of them were being actively exploited. So I think that was why it just kind of, at the time...
Yeah, and there was no attribution. There was no...
Yeah, no attribution.
No discussion.
Yeah, so it just kind of looked like some researcher or maybe even Microsoft itself found it and patched it, and, no big deal, move on. But apparently it was a big deal. So there are, there's other theories like that Microsoft maybe paid Shadow Broker itself, or maybe Microsoft independently discovered this stuff and patched it, and the Shadow Broker saw that it was patched and decided to have a little bit of fun on a Friday before Easter. So there's a lot of different hypotheses around this, but really,
I gotta think
no idea for sure.
No, correct, no idea for sure. But the fact that every single Windows exploit against a currently supported operating system was patched tells me that it's highly likely Microsoft was aware of what was in this dump and had time to address it.
It certainly seems that way, yes.
Now, how they did that, I can't tell you. But I don't think this was coincidence, and I don't think that there was just an overlap of independently discovered vulnerabilities that happened to be fixed around the same time frame.
Right.
Somebody was talking to somebody.
Yeah, I was talking to some people on Twitter, and someone mentioned that Microsoft may have seen this from telemetry, being exploited, or they may have gotten a heads up from some other third party researcher. But if they had done that, I would assume they would have indicated that there was in fact active exploitation in the bulletin, and they said there was not. So.
And that's also assuming that every single one of these was being actively exploited in a way that Microsoft was able to capture and solve. Like they didn't miss a single one.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, I don't want to make it sound like everything's all happy and roses and puppy dogs and kittens. Windows 2003 is vulnerable to a lot of these. Windows Server 2003, that is vulnerable to a lot of these exploits. And there will be no patches. So if you are, the hole keeps getting deeper for you if you are running older versions of Windows.
Well, and also if you don't patch aggressively.
Yeah, that's also true. No, go ahead.
Most of these ports that are compromised typically are closed to the internet anyway. So to me, this is more a lot of great fodder for a malicious outsider who's come in through some sort of phishing or other malware and gotten some persistence on somebody's desktop. But in general, the assumption is most organizations don't patch quickly, but individuals do, with the automatic patching being pushed in things like Windows 10 and such. I keep rolling around in my head if enterprises should be patching Windows patches as quickly as they possibly can. And is the risk of a patch breaking something higher or lower than the risk of a missing patch being exploited? Because the whole point of why we hold off on patching is so that we can test it with a test group and do due diligence and make sure nothing vital breaks. And I guess every individual corporation has to figure that out for themselves. But I'm starting to drift over to the thinking that the risk is higher to wait on patching than it is for a patch to be faulty. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is up to each individual organization to make to have to make that call, because if you're a small shop and you just have a couple of desktops down and everybody goes to lunch, while the IT person fixes it, that's a different thing versus a major enterprise completely unable to process orders or something like that. So I suspect that I can't help but think that this is the trade-off of the almost certain impact to your productivity from an outage versus the off chance of some exploit happening.
Agreed. This is why I'm struggling with the topic. I also think it's harder now because we no longer have individual patches we can push. It's not like I could just say, wow, this one's getting exploited, I'm going to take the risk on this one. It's a cumulative roll-up of everything.
Yeah, I think the enterprise version still gives you some granularity, but
yeah, a little bit. There's also a conversation that could be had around workstations versus servers. You might say, hey, let's push our workstations because they're the ones most likely to get attacked in the short term.
Right.
I don't know. It's a tough call, but I do think at some point it's worth revisiting the risk trade-off of waiting to patch in an enterprise before you test.
Yeah, definitely agree. Now, I was thinking about this, and I was kind of doing a postmortem of what my thoughts were on Friday about this, and so at the time my thinking was that this was in fact a couple of 0 days, and they are SMB, right? So they're the Windows RPC port 445 is how this is exploited. And it occurred to me that if you have a system that's connected to the internet, and maybe there's some selection bias here, right? But I've never really seen a system sit on the internet with port 445 open for long and not get compromised. And so that's one data point. So if you're hanging out there like that, you probably already have problems. And then on the inside, so if you think about it as an internal attack vector, there's already a plethora of tools and techniques and whatnot to move laterally. You don't, a sophisticated, even maybe an unsophisticated attacker doesn't really need this tool to move around. Once they compromise a workstation, they don't really need this tool or this exploit to do that. So to me, it seemed like the marginal risk here was that it became worm. Somebody wrote a worm like Conficker.
Agreed. I think the other aspect of an unknown exploit is that your IPSs and IDSs and HIPs and whatnot aren't configured to look for it. Well,
sure.
Right.
Yep.
Assuming that you've got that instrumentation set up and ready to go.
So anyway, and by the way, it's still entirely possible that somebody may update Conficker with MS 17010. So we'll see that. The nightmare scenario I was thinking of was the disk wiper malware with with combined with Conficker. That'd be super.
Yeah, I mean, we're still early in the analysis of this dump. There could be a lot more interesting stuff coming out.
Indeed. So let's move on to the next story, which comes from bleepingcomputer.com, and the title is "Former Sysadmin Accused of Planting Time Bomb in Company Database." This is kind of a wild story. So the company here is Allegro Microsystems in I guess it's in Massachusetts.
Now, I thought Allegro was an allergy medicine.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I'm just saying.
It's IT and allergies. Yep.
That's an interesting diversification. No.
Yeah.
Anyway, go on.
So they had this employee named Nimesh Patel, who allegedly did some naughty stuff. So Nimesh was an employee for about 14 years, resigned sometime around January of 2016, and he had 3 laptops. He had 3 company-provided laptops, which was kind of interesting on its own. 2 of them were for business purposes, and one of them was an older laptop that he could use for personal purposes. And so in the after he resigned, they asked for his laptops back, and he gave just one of the 3 back, one of the work-related laptops back. And then later the company came back to him and said, come on, man, we want the other laptop. So he then wiped the laptop he was given for personal use and then handed that one back in. But apparently he was also pretty pissed off because he went to the company's headquarters and parked in the parking lot and used his other company-provided laptop to jump onto their Wi-Fi network, which apparently they have some kind of fancy, it sounds like they had some kind of fancy setup where you needed some certificate to get onto the Wi-Fi, which this work laptop had, and then hadn't been deactivated.
Mm-hmm.
And to make it even better, he had a file that contained the credentials of his coworkers on his laptop,
which I find absolutely fascinating.
Absolutely. I don't know how that happens.
So he used another employee's credential to get into the system, perhaps at the Wi-Fi level, perhaps further in the story, because he had a file with the username and passwords on his laptop.
Right.
So, any modern password system shouldn't be like that. You shouldn't be able to have the clear text of the password. It should be a one-way encryption. Now, you could break them in theory, but I don't think that's what's implied here. It seems like they just maintained a clear text copy of username and passwords.
That Patel had access to employee credentials because he was one of the company's senior systems administrators and kept a copy of a file with usernames and passwords on his laptop. I mean, what did they do? Walk around and collect them? I don't know. That's weird.
See, it was a concierge password change service.
Oh, that's probably what it was. Yeah. So Nimesh here was a Oracle Financials administrator. You see where this is going? Huh?
Mm-hmm.
So he wrote some code and uploaded some code using one of his former coworkers' IDs that waited a couple of months and shortly after, time to coincide with the period right after their fiscal close in April. It basically wiped their, trashed their financial table, so they couldn't close the year. So he intentionally timed it to be kind of as damaging as possible. And in the subsequent investigation, the company realized that there was some code that did this, and they traced it back and figured out that it was his old laptop that connected to the Wi-Fi at the time, and blah blah blah. So they kind of pieced it together. Now they're suing Nimesh for $100,000 at least, and it's apparently set for trial later this year. So we'll see. But the thing that strikes me is, there were so many opportunities for this not to have happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So many failures of best practices. Shut down accounts of people who leave. Rotate passwords. If you've got a senior guy with this much access, you may need to take some extra steps.
Right.
I also find it interesting. This is not a criminal complaint of any type at this point. It's purely civil. Yeah,
it is. It is pretty interesting. And so it also strikes me, and I know people may say, "Oh, this hardly ever happens. Like, there's just not that many stories like this." And I'm going to say, I think this sort of thing happens a lot more often than any of us really realize, because companies, especially larger companies, are super averse to airing its laundry. They would just rather, pick themselves back up, dust themselves off, and get on with it, rather than, go through the hoopla of disclosing it and whatnot.
There is a great deal of institutional shame involved with this. Whereas, let's say this was a physical break-in. Some former employee came back, smashed in the front door, and grabbed something. We don't blame the victim in that case.
Right.
Right. We don't start analyzing the locks they had on the door, though sometimes we do. We just say, hey, that guy did something bad. It's it's on him. Yeah,
there's no defensive physical security podcast where we talk about how they should have used better locks, is there?
Well, maybe we'll start that. But it's interesting how we still have the shame around the IT side of it. And I'm not saying that's good or ill. I'm just saying it's different.
No, it definitely is. Well, I think, it's a different. I'm not sure that the metaphor, and
because I think there's an acceptable, societally approved level of due care on physical security.
Yes, that's exactly. And the number of actors you're exposed to is limited by your physical location.
Correct.
And you don't really have that. Now, I mean, this guy parked in front of this is a little bit different situation, right? But in general, in the cyber world, anybody in the world theoretically could be trying to break in your door, whereas in the physical world, they have to be like in front of your building.
Right. So it's an interesting, but if it were a bank and they didn't have a vault and they had $20 million in small unmarked bills sitting in a small cash drawer, yeah, we would criticize that.
Absolutely.
Because they're not meeting the level of due care that is commonsensical around that industry.
Right. So I guess that to your point, this points out that we just don't have that. We don't have that concept in the logical world.
And will we ever? I don't know.
Things are moving too fast. It's hard to imagine that happening anytime soon.
Well, as an aside, I don't think we have this as a story, but we've talked a lot about cyber insurance and cyber liability insurance. And one of the cyber insurance vendors is partnering with Symantec to start establishing that due care necessary to be insured.
They have to have SEP installed everywhere.
Right. Or whatever it may be. But that's something you and I predicted would likely happen.
Yeah.
Is that there would be some – because the insurers have to figure out some way to limit liability.
Oh, absolutely. And in somewhat of a uniform way, right? Because it's probably going to be cost prohibitive to kind of figure out all of the nuances of each individual customer.
Right.
Some are mainframe, some are, mixed Windows, Linux, some are all Linux, some are all Windows, some are, and every other variable you can think of. So it's a very different type of landscape. Now, but I think this particular case shows that the fundamentals are really important. Like, when you have an employee, especially an administrator, and longtime listeners will know that I'm a little down on the IT people, right? That IT people are employees who get disgruntled just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And so we need to make sure we have that in mind, and so I think that when hopefully this is kind of a wake up call, and obviously not a really high level case or super important case, I should say. I'm sure it's important to Allegro, but it's not a Target or a Home Depot or something like that. But it really points out that the simple things like deactivating user IDs after someone leaves in a timely manner is really important, and changing the importance of changing passwords and multi-factor authentication and just the basics that comes up over and over again.
We get very caught up with the sexy nation state 0-day stuff, and that's not what burns us.
Right.
It's the block and tackling every day.
Absolutely.
But that's not sexy and fun.
No, it is not. So moving on to our next story. This one comes from Computer World, and the title is "What Prevents Breaches? A Process, Technology, or People?" One answer is PC, and one answer is right. The caveat here is the story is written by Ira Winkler, who's kind of a controversial character in the security industry. So, put that in your pipe and smoke it. But he had a couple of interesting points in here that I thought were pretty good. One was to make sure that you implement technology, and it's just kind of like intuitive, right? But I thought it was worth reiterating. It's important to implement technology in a way that anticipates the inevitable user failure. And by the way, the whole kind of theme of this story is that Ira Winkler is a person who specializes in training, in training companies for security awareness and whatnot. And his whole, his theme in this article is that he believes that process is the most important thing. It's not people in training. It's the process. And he goes so far as to say that your training should be telling people what to do in situations like with a phishing email, not what to be afraid of. And I thought that was kind of insightful, because I know I've seen a lot of training classes that just kind of beat into you how horrible it is, how horrible phishing attacks are, versus what do you do if you get it, if you suspect one. And so I think that's really important. And then the other point I thought was really great, and maybe it's just because it resonates with me, is that process. He describes that the driving factor behind most companies' process documents is to pass audits and for ease of proving your compliance, rather than any kind of operational or effectiveness purpose. So that was an interesting perspective, which I think is probably true for most organizations. So
yeah, I would agree. I had some interesting thoughts here too. That at least I hope they're interesting. He talks about process as most important, and he quickly pivots that to say that process is driven by governance. I get that. Governance can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, though.
Yeah, but he has a book on it, so I mean that.
Right. Therefore, it must.
And he pimps the book in the article, so yeah, that's.
That's true. That's true. It's a very good point. But the problem I have is that governance and process cannot predict every situation, and things come up quickly and change quickly. Normally, when I see an organization that is heavy on governance, that governance is usually a couple of years behind the state of the art in the threat. They're fighting the last war, as you were.
Yep.
So,
yep.
And that governance can tie the hands of an organization in terms of being nimble, in terms of responding to the current threats, especially if they're staffed just enough to meet that governance load in a highly regulatory or highly governed environment. So I understand, and I don't disagree with this point, but I do think people are inherently unpredictable And at least in terms of doing the safest possible choice in a risky situation, they are unreliable for all sorts of reasons we've talked about as to why phishing always works. And people have been shown to, no matter how great they are in some circumstances, in other circumstances, due to stress or workload or incentives, social engineering works because it's social engineering. It's meant to work. The bad guys know how to exploit that. So I think technology has to backstop human failure.
Yeah. Yep.
At the end of the day.
And he comes out and says that, right? That was one of his main points, was that you need to, I think what the quote I read was, you have to implement technology in a way that anticipates the inevitable user failure. That's right. And I think that's exactly what you said. And
yep.
I think his net point is that when you go and train, right, the most important thing is to impress on people how to react in a particular situation. Right, not that you can train them, how to recognize every permutation of a phishing email, because you're not going to be able to do that. But
right.
If they see one, what should they do? That's I think what his point was. So anyway, interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was trying to look up a quote here that I cannot seem to find, but
it's a Sun Tzu quote, isn't it?
Damn, how did you know? I thought I was going to be all edgy and hip and cool, pulling out the, Sun Tzu quote about SQL injection, but fine. No, okay, I should have been better prepared here. Elon Musk wrote something recently about being a slave to process and governance. And when the process becomes the goal, originally a process is built because of a desired outcome. But when satisfying the process becomes the desired outcome, you lose the point of the original process, and you lose the efficiency and the goal of whatever was originally intended, and you become a slave to the process. And he had a really good quote around this the other day, and I can't find it, but it would have fit in really nicely here in the story. And in general, something I see often with IT security is once we get really governed and really process oriented and really documented, we lose the whole concept of what the risk is we were trying to mitigate anyway.
Well, I think audit programs have that problem in spades. Security policies and the flip side, which is the audits. It becomes completely disconnected in a lot of companies from the actual security threat.
Yeah, agreed. And also those who are deciding, building, and auditing those governance processes are typically auditors who don't understand the state of the threat and aren't understanding that this is actually counterproductive to countering current threat.
Right. But they have to have, I think that their counter is, well, they have to audit to some objective baseline, which kind of tells me that the whole premise may be flawed. I'm not saying that I have a better method.
No, but I think you're absolutely right. Is there a fundamental question of whether or not the current concept of big company IT auditing is even effective?
Yeah, my view is it's dysfunctional.
Let's take a look at some brand new threat that comes out via phishing. That's an attack against Microsoft Outlook preview pane. Right? Nothing in governance has anything. Most typically, will have anything to say about that.
Right. The only thing, and the most they would say is, did you apply the patch in a certain amount of time when it came out, right? That's it.
Yeah. Did you have your email security controls in place and running?
Right. Did you have your antivirus on?
Right. So I don't know. I have a longer rant. I'll have to work up on that one of these days. But moving on.
So our next story comes from CSO Online, I should say, and the title is "Report: 30% of malware is 0-day, missed by legacy antivirus."
No.
All right. So here's where the pedants come in.
No.
Here comes the pedants. Malware is not 0-day, right? So, but I guess
malware's not 0-day just because it got past your antivirus.
Exactly. Right.
Antivirus effectiveness has nothing to do with whether or not something is a 0-day.
Right.
This is a marketing department who you misappropriated a term.
Yeah. It is.
Taking it back.
It is. Yes. It is definitely a marketing department. So, but the point is, and I mean, I think they're describing something real, even though they're using bad terminology, and they point out that in 2016, this is the report from WatchGuard, which conveniently happens to sell a next generation antivirus gateway thing.
No,
I know, it's surprising, right? It's very surprising.
I'm going to need a minute.
Yeah, you've been shaken to your core, right? So,
My entire version of life has been just shaken.
So they point out that with customers, they looked at the traditional antivirus caught about almost 9 million malware variants, and their behavioral system caught another close to 4 million. And so that kind of delta shows you that there's quite a lot that's slipping through the cracks. And by the way, every report, depending on where you read it, it's all over the map. I mean, sometimes when you read this, it's as low as 5%, and sometimes it's in the 90s. And I think it really depends on who is the company producing the report. So
we're rehashing the fact that antivirus misses stuff.
Yeah, and that it's really important to use the new anti-APT the next generation web-based or cloud-based machine learning
and who
artificial
would sell that
intelligence.
Again?
Oh, at WatchGuard, well, they'll sell to you right now.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
They'll hook you up.
Meanwhile, I've been viciously attacked by Fiona as she demands cuddles as we're recording the podcast.
So, Fiona's his cat, by the way, before anybody gets any ideas.
Yes. She's crawling all over me right now.
So there were a couple of other interesting things in there. They pointed out that in this report there was an analysis of the top attack vectors, and all of the top 10 were web-based, and that 73% of those were...
Wait.
Yeah. All of the top 10 were web-based attacks that attack a web server or other network services via web-based portals.
How many other reports have we seen, like 90% of attacks start with some sort of email-based attack?
Look, it's right here. WatchGuard doesn't sell email stuff, probably. So they probably just cut that. They cut that data right out, and so right. Of what's left, I'm guessing.
Of the types of attacks that our technology can stop.
Yes. The top 10 were web-based. 73% of which were attacks against web browsers.
Wait, what?
Yeah, well, so
you're saying like malicious websites attacking browsers in a drive-by download or something? Or
yeah, exactly. Right.
Okay. I thought they were initially saying like it was against web servers and SQL
injections. Well, the other 27% were, yeah. And then the leading exploit category, which I don't know how to square that away with what we just talked about right there, is Linux Trojans, which look to open Linux or to turn Linux devices into zombies, like the Mirai botnet, right?
Really?
And, yep. So that's the leading one, I guess.
Is that including like against phones running Android?
I guess. Obviously,
this story hurts my head.
Well, I mean, so we know that Mirai was a big and continues to be a big pain in the butt, and there are a lot of other things like it constantly trolling the internet, trying to sign them up to a botnet. So that one's doesn't seem terribly far-fetched.
Currently, botnet creators are kind of like multi-level marketers.
I think that's good, yeah.
So they're like the Avon lady of the internet.
Sure. Yes.
All right, carry on.
Yeah. So yeah, that was all for that one. Moving on to our next.
Well, I think the takeaway, guys, is look at who writes these things, look at who pays for the report, and be very skeptical when it's a vendor.
Yeah. And so on that point, and I don't know the. I don't think I saw any of the source data, right? But I suspect that, as we talked about, we joked about it, right? But in all likelihood, the set of data they're using is based on what they've detected, right? And so if they don't have the capability to detect email-based attacks, it's not going to show up in their data.
Sure. Right. So they have one slice of reality looking through a straw of some size.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Sometimes what's not there is more important. All right, so moving on to our next story, which comes from Wired, and the title is How Hackers Hijacked a Bank's Entire Online Operation. I feel like we need, suspenseful music right there. But
dun dun.
Yeah. So Brazilian unnamed bank, or unnamed Brazilian bank, to be more succinct, was the victim of a pretty interesting attack. Some bad people cloned their website.
Hold on, we're assuming they're bad people. You don't know.
Well, I guess that's true. They could be, I don't know, some charity or nonprofit. It could be the Red Cross. I mean, who knows, right?
They could be perfectly wonderful people who just
they're diversifying their.
What if they're amoral? You can't make a judgment call on their morals, Mister. I don't think you're in any position.
I'm morally privileged, aren't I?
Anyway, back to the story.
So yes, the suspected, maybe possibly bad people, cloned this bank's online website. They used the Let's Encrypt service to get certificates for their lookalike websites. Then they compromised through some way, we don't really know how, they compromised the domain registrar account for the bank, and then diverted the bank's actual website to their clone. And so now,
well, what they must have done is either stood up their own DNS server and pointed the main .com record over to their DNS server, or the DNS was hosted at the registrar. We're not sure which.
Yeah, right. What I suspect, if I read between the lines, what it sounds like they did was, let's say it was ABC Bank, www.abcbank.com. What they did was they went into the registrar and they created a DNS record with which was a CNAME to their lookalike site.
Right.
And so anybody that
they could have also. That is one option. The other option is they stood up their own DNS server and just changed the IP addresses of.
Well, the reason the reason I don't think they did that is because before the attack, they had set up the domains and they had gotten SSL certificates.
Right.
And so the only way they would have been able to do that is if they're using their own domain, not the bank's domain. And so they're, I guess they could have done that, but they would have been a more convoluted.
It is unclear when we get to that portion of the story, because jumping ahead a little bit, they had valid certificates,
right,
for the domain. So either they duplicated the valid certificates with Let's Encrypt. Because what's interesting is Let's Encrypt has sort of an offense in here that the only way that certificate would have been issued is if somebody proved that they had control of the domain. And this certificate was issued 6 months ahead of the hijacking.
Correct, but I don't. It's a little unclear in the article, but I don't think the SSL certificate they had was for the bank's actual domain. I think it was for a domain that looked like the bank's domain.
Right. Yeah, it's unclear because we don't know who the bank is, and so we're still missing some key details. But the concept of attacking the DNS registrar and forwarding traffic is incredibly powerful.
Right. So apparently this was going on for 5 hours. And from the perspective of a customer, the only thing that really would have been noticeably different was that probably they didn't have an extended validation certificate. And honestly,
or when they actually logged in, it didn't quite do what they expected it to do.
Well, yeah, but I mean, up to that point, right?
Right.
If you go to the website, you go to your bank's website, and it looks like it normally does, but the extended validation certificate, the little green crap in the browser bar isn't there. What's the likelihood you're gonna notice that? And
close to zero.
Yeah. So anyway, the idea here was that they were collecting credentials, valid bank credentials. And what I thought was really interesting was that for the time this was going on, the bank was kind of hosed because they couldn't even email.
Right.
They couldn't
their MX records are down.
They couldn't.
So the bad guys could have also cloned their email and just started sitting, with owning DNS, they can own the MX record, which means they can send all email to whatever the hell they want.
Right.
And start looking at all inbound email.
Right. Now, there was also in here, and they didn't go into a lot of detail, but there was also a discussion in here about how they may have been man-in-the-middling ATM transactions too.
That I find much more difficult to understand easily.
Yeah, see, but just how many, this is quoting, just how many of the bank's millions of customers were caught up in the DNS attacks remains a mystery. Kaspersky says the bank hasn't shared that information with the security firm, nor has it publicly disclosed the attack. But the firm says it's possible the attackers could have harvested hundreds of thousands or millions of customer account details, not only from their phishing scheme and malware, but also from redirecting ATM and point-of-sale transactions to infrastructure they controlled. We really don't know, this is a quote, we really don't know what was the biggest harm, malware, phishing, point-of-sale, or ATMs. Now, the one thing we didn't mention is that they actually, the bad guys or ladies, in addition to cloning the website and collecting phishing, they also pushed down some malware, which purported to be an update for some security software that the bank actually did use. And so if you went to the bank site and you tried to log in, you got a prompt to install some malware that looked like a security update. So that's super awesome.
It's a nasty attack.
Yeah. Now, I was surprised it only lasted for 5 hours.
Yes, agreed. They caught on pretty quick. But I think this is also one that's fairly easy to counter. So there's implications here. It's maybe the registrar was social engineered, whatnot, but I think proper two-factor authentication or whatnot around your domain probably, or around your domain registrar, would have stopped this.
I would imagine so. It seems likely, but in the past there has been a lot of hoopla about you doctor up some government issued IDs and claim that you're locked out of the account and whatever.
Yep.
So
they are a customer service organization, so there's probably ways to social engineer your way around it.
So we don't really know, but I mean it could have been phishing. We really don't know. But you're right. Most registrars do offer multi-factor authentication, which if you're not taking advantage of that, you probably should. And you probably also should be thinking about if your online presence is of any significant importance to you, you should also think about or come up with a way that you would recover your domain if this kind of thing happens, right? So would you know who to contact at the registrar? And do you know what kind of information they would need from you to get back into your account? So I don't think it's rocket science, but it's if it ever comes up, it's probably a good thing to know. And if you go ahead.
It's probably the same thing with your IP registration for ARIN or your local IP authority too. Same thing. Often it's some relatively low level engineer in IT that did that stuff, and you should probably be a little bit more formalized around that.
Yes, indeed. And if you are a larger organization that has a lot of importance pinned on your website, you ought to look into some kind of monitoring service to detect unauthorized changes, right? I mean, there are services that will detect and notify you, that your DNS has dramatically changed.
Hopefully not via email.
Yes. You may want to use a different email server. That's true. Good point.
Or some SMS alert or something.
Good point. So,
and also, maybe have like a Twitter account or something I don't know. I mean, this is a tough one because they couldn't even notify their customers. You've got to think about an out-of-band communication protocol.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. They couldn't tell their customers to stop logging in.
It's tough. It's a tough one.
So moving on to the next story, which comes from softpedia.com. The title is 2 laptops with Hong Kong's 3.7 million voters' data stolen. So there were 2 laptops that contained this about 3.7 million voter records, for relatively sensitive information, like ID numbers, addresses, contact phone numbers, that sort of stuff. But apparently it was encrypted on the drive, so they did that well. The one thing the whole reason I wanted to bring this story up, I thought this was fascinating to think about, and I'm going to quote here. The data stolen includes personal information on voters like ID cards, numbers, addresses, and contact numbers, making for a rather important trove of information that could be worth a fortune on the dark web. The office says that this data is encrypted and should be safe, but that really isn't any guarantee the information won't leak or that encryption won't be broken. And so I was thinking, that's a really interesting thing because in like with HIPAA, I'm just going to pick on HIPAA for a second. And I know I can hear Martin Fisher like already raising his fist, getting ready to yell at me. If you lose data that's been encrypted like that, oftentimes it's not considered a reportable breach.
Whereas they're assuming here that even though it's encrypted, it'll be broken. Correct,
and that's a fascinating thought because it's not. I mean, it's kind of right. If you look at
maybe depends on the type of.
But if you look. And it's not that the encryption algorithm is going to be broken. It's that the encryption implementation is. So, I mean, how many times have we found in the past, 5 or 6 years that, Apple and Microsoft and, I guess really Apple and Microsoft, there were ways to circumvent the encryption.
True. Maybe not at the time, but maybe over time.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? So if you hold on to the laptop for a while, and maybe you can recover the data in a couple of years after some exploit is uncovered, vulnerability is uncovered. So it was an interesting thought.
I had another thought about this. So the encryption, I'm assuming, is full disk encryption. That's my assumption. I don't know that to be the case.
Correct. Yeah.
But how you do full disk encryption is also an interesting thing. So I've seen a number of implementations that do pre-boot authentication. So even before the operating system loads, it's asking for some credentials of usually the local user to boot. So let's say it's a Windows. It's basically caching the Windows login down to a pre-boot authentication routine and then asking you to log in before the operating system loads. Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me. That's more secure. But what I've also seen is that an operating system that's full disk encrypted can fully load without any sort of pre-boot authentication and come up fully. So even though I can't log in, I now have the entire operating system stack to attack.
Right.
So assuming I've got a full disk encrypted box that will boot the OS and I can get it on my network, like assuming it's got DHCP or something, I don't care that it's a full disk encrypted drive at that point. Now I only care about popping the OS over the network. Or locally, perhaps. Maybe. I don't know. It's just something I was thinking about, that there's a lot of ways that you can get a checkbox for having a full disk encrypted box, but not really get a lot of protection from it.
Yeah, the other common concern is that if you suspend or I guess if you hibernate it, is it? I don't know. Right. I always lose the hibernate versus sleep. Anyway, right. One or the other, kind of just puts it to sleep, and if you open it back up, it's it's effectively still on and running and decrypted, even if you had the pre-boot type drive encryption. And so, when you lose a laptop, that's also an important thing to figure out. Was it shut off? Mm-hmm. Because if it wasn't shut off, even though it was full disk encrypted, you may still.
There's memory attacks to recover the key. There's all sorts of stuff.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So anyway, something to think about for you. Next and last story for this evening is from the Palo Alto blog. Title is Threat Brief: Credential Theft Keystone of the Shamoon 2 Attacks. So we talked about this, I guess it was last fall. There was another set of the Shamoon type attacks, which is the Distract drive wiper malware that originally hit Saudi Aramco back in, it was a number of years ago. And at the time, there's not a lot of details about how it was spread, and then it popped up again late last year and really early this year. Back in the Middle East again, and again, there's questions. Well, how does this thing get propagated? And how is it being spread? So Palo Alto has a write up about how that's, at least from the point at which they kind of got into they can cut into the exploit chain, as it were. They found out that the attackers are entering the organization through RDP, and they're either using default credentials or stolen credentials, and it appears there may be, depending on the customer, may be doing both.
Are they entering or spreading laterally via RDP?
So they're entering the network with RDP. So that presumes that RDP is open to the world.
That seems bad.
Well, you'd be surprised. A lot of organizations use this as their remote access.
Yeah, that's true.
Solution, right?
But at the end of the day, it comes back to still having some sort of credential, apparently.
Correct.
Yeah. Correct.
Now, I suppose it's also conceivable, and the article's a little bit vague, right? I guess it's conceivable that there's, that they've previously compromised the workstation and they're using RDP on from one internal system to another system. But the way they wrote it smacks to me of what I've seen in the past, where companies have, stuck servers on the internet, and that's how their employees get remote access. So anyway, then the attackers they use that server they've compromised to install their tools, and then they launch the malware. Now the malware itself is hard coded with a set of computer names and credentials, hard coded with credentials. So what this article is not clear on, and they point this out, is that that they can see the attackers come in via RDP. They can see them, installing their toolkit. They can see them pushing out the Shamoon malware, but the malware is hard coded with credentials that allows it to have access to all of the the workstations and systems that it's infecting. Which they're supposing that there was some previous attack that collected, probably against the Active Directory, my favorite thing, that collected all of the host names and the passwords.
Yeah, there's not a step in the attack where they're observing them collecting hosts and credentials. So it must have been pre-collected somehow.
Right. So this is apparently stage 2 in the program. So stage 1 was some reconnaissance where they collected the list of server or host names and a set of credentials that let the malware propagate out. So when it propagates out to a host, that host in turn tries to infect another 256 hosts on its local subnet. And so, it kind of fans out that way. So basically the the central host that they've compromised has a piece of malware that has a roster of hosts that it's going to reach out to and try to infect. Okay, so it has credentials and it knows the host name and it reaches out and it infects those. And then each one of those hosts in turn tries to infect its local subnet.
The local Class C it's on.
Right.
It's assuming it's on Class C, but it goes after.
Right.
Yeah, just integrate the last octet from 0 to 255.
Correct. So that's that's interesting, and they point out that this is again, if you have better control of your credentials, right? This is a pretty effective mitigation against the Shamoon. The entire kill chain, to use that god awful phrase, gets cut because this campaign relies on the hard coded credentials. So if you were using, for instance, multi-factor authentication, it wouldn't work. Now, that's not to say that they wouldn't come up with some other way, right? But
it depends on what credentials it is. It could be a service account. It could be all sorts of stuff. We don't know what credentials they're gathering.
Well, that's also true.
Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns here.
Also true, but fortunately, not a lot of people have been the unlucky victim of a Shamoon attack. It is. I've been on the periphery of one, and it's not pretty. Hopefully, it doesn't become more common. But I think it's an interesting read on how a slightly more advanced attacker is getting into and propagating throughout an organization. So, worth the read.
Indeed.
Lot of other details are linked. Other reports are linked from this particular paper. So give it a read. And that is the show for this evening. And damn it, I'm really going to try to get back on schedule and be back with you next week. And just a reminder that I want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank all of our Patreon donors.
Absolutely. Me too. Thank you, guys. You guys are awesome. And
I want to remind everybody to, if you want to find links to all the stories, go to our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Khaled on Twitter at Lurg and me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. Anything else you want to add?
Let's see.
You want to plug your book forward?
Oh yeah, thank you. I wrote a forward to a book that should be out any second now, if not now. I think some people are getting copies. So it's the Defensive Security Handbook. Name is similar to our show, but unrelated to our show. It was written by a couple other folks, good friends of the show, and I conned my way into writing their forward. So don't let that dissuade you. The rest of the book's very good.
It is. What I've read so far is very good. So I look forward to reading the rest of it.
So check that out at your preferred bookseller. What else? I've got a project with O'Reilly and myself that is getting close to finishing, and I might be able to talk a little more about that soon in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. A little tease there.
Awesome.
DerbyCon tickets are going on sale soon, but don't buy them till I do.
Yeah, we'll let you know when it's safe to buy them. Yep.
What else? What else is going on? Anything you want to plug?
Nope, I'm good.
All right.
So thanks, everyone.
We'll call it a show. Thank you. If you like us, give us some internet points on iTunes ratings.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Talk again soon. Bye.
Bye.